Hello and welcome to another episode of Face to Face. My name is Godfred Akoto Boafo. My guest today can be considered one of the most trusted confidants of the former President of the Republic of Ghana, John Dramani Mahama. He has served as a Minister of State and, come 2020, says he wants to try to get into Parliament. Felix Ofosu is our guest on Face to Face. Felix, welcome to Face to Face.
Thank you, Godfred.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I've been around.
You've been busy.
Well, as you can imagine, it was the election season just a couple of weeks ago, and I had to do what was necessary to win the confidence of the delegates of the NDC in Abora Asebu Kwamankese, so that they would elect me to represent them in the 2020 elections. And I am gratified that it ended in success.
What brought about the decision to go back home, if it can be called that? Are you going back home?
Well, it is home. That is where my mom comes from. Mm-hmm. My lineage is drawn right from the royal family at Abakrampa. I'm a descendant of Nana Otu VI, popularly called Nana Gardner. He happens to be my great-grandmother's great-granduncle. So that's where I draw my lineage from. I know that in the run-up to the elections, there were a few people who questioned whether I heard from there, but that is all well and good. It happens in elections. So I was unfazed by it once I was certain about my lineage. Now, Abora Asebu Kwamankese can be considered one of the safest bets in terms of its support for the National Democratic Congress. But absolutely, out of 6 elections, we won 4. And I've had cause to say elsewhere, and I believe in a previous interview with you, that on the 2 occasions that we have lost the seat, it has been due to some internal friction arising out of the parliamentary or primary process, I beg your pardon. So in 2016, we were unable to mend fences after some discontent ensued from the primaries. And it's reflected in the way that people voted. We won the presidential election and lost marginally in the parliamentary primaries. So the challenge really has been to bind the party together in the Abora Asebu Kwamankese constituency, and we will have the seat. And I have been focused on that. I've been working with various interest groups and stakeholders within the party to achieve just that. It's even reflected in the kind of campaign that I waged. But over the years, when you compare that constituency to others that border it, like Cape Coast North, Cape Coast South, Asen South, Infantiman, and what have you, you find that we suffer some relative deprivation. The living standards are quite low, and in terms of infrastructure, it is nothing to write home about. So we have been left behind. We lag behind in many, many ways. The human development indicators are not the best. So I find that it is necessary to step in there, throw my hat into the ring, and attempt, first of all, to focus national attention on that constituency. And in the process, see what can be done to direct the sort of development that is required for that constituency. At the moment, we do not have a voice around the national conversation.
Why? They have a member of parliament.
Well, we do, but I'm sure that, but for the research that you had to carry out for this program, you would struggle to mention his name if I asked you who he was. I do not intend to denigrate him. I do not intend to badmouth him. But the reality is that he has failed to give us the sort of representation that we need. When you compare him to other MPs in the central region, even within his own party, and those constituencies that we share boundaries with, he has not lived up to expectation. In fact, this reflected in the recent University of Ghana Political Science Department poll that they conducted. His approval ratings are quite low. I think it's below 30%. And that speaks volumes about what the people make of his performance. The people in the constituency, in my interactions with them, have clearly indicated that there's not a sustainable position going forward, and something needs to be done. So there's a huge clamor for change. And if that change is to be effected, what would then be required will be someone who will be able to step up to the plate and do what is necessary to focus attention on the constituency and bring the development that is required. And I find that given that I've been in this business of politics for quite some time, I've had the opportunity to serve in government. I have along the line picked up some experience, some knowledge in governance and politics, which will come in handy for a project like that. I've also been at the receiving end of calls from various interest groups, youth groups, opinion leaders, some chiefs, and other interest groups have prevailed upon me to consider the prospect of contesting. Indeed, in 2015, I came under similar pressure, but I resisted it. I thought that it was a bit too early and that I needed to allow the process that had been set in motion at the time to go through to fruition and see what would happen. I had hoped earnestly that our previous candidate, Professor Samuel Kweku Hayford, would win. And I believe that he possessed the quality to represent us effectively. Unfortunately, that did not come to fruition, and we lost the seat. But once we lost the seat, then I was left with no choice than to step in and salvage the fortunes of that constituency. And I believe that when I'm elected, I'll be able to live up to this billing.
I see you are choosing your words quite carefully, because you're not just speaking to us, you're speaking to your constituents as well. I see you say, I will focus attention, try to bring attention. Not that I will bring the development or I will do this. Has that been a consistent message? Because we do also pair that same political science research that was done. That shows that a lot of parliamentarians get to suffer, or people who are going to parliament, because they go there and make promises of, I'm going to build a road, hospital, schools. Are you making those kind of promises?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I'm fully aware of the role of an MP, at least on paper.
Are your constituents aware?
Oh, they are. They are in no doubt about what an MP does. An MP essentially concerns himself with legislation, representation of his constituents, legislation, and participates in executive oversight. But you see, the reality also is that for a constituency like mine, that has for a long period been deprived and not been able to live up to its potential, there's an urgent clamor for development. So it is no longer tenable for the legislator representing them to say that his role is only limited to legislation and executive oversight. They believe that once the MP is perhaps the most prominent political figure within the constituency, he should possess the clout to influence the driving of development to the constituency. And so in electing somebody to represent them, they look forward to that. So you cannot just show up and tell them that yours is just represent them in parliament and make laws and help keep the executive in check. You need to demonstrate an ability to influence development in that constituency. And indeed, one of my trump cards going into the election was that I had had occasion previously to assist with some development projects. The most prominent amongst them was an ICT center. We call it a Community Information Center, which was sited at Abakrampa Methodist School Park sometime in 2016, just before we left office. I influenced that. There was also the need for some computers to be sent to a number of secondary schools in the constituency. So I helped that way. Indeed, in the last few weeks, I've had occasion to mobilize some hospital equipment and distribute to about 5 CHIPS compounds. And there are a number of things too that I have done that I can speak about. So the people look at that and see that, well, it is true that the MP's role is limited to lawmaking. But if you can have someone who can leverage his experience and clout in the politics of our country and contacts to bring something to the table in terms of development, then we probably may have to go for that person. I know that the district assemblies, metropolitan, municipal and district assemblies, have the primary responsibility, given that they represent central government at local level, to initiate development and ensure that it is spread in a manner that is equitable within the constituency. But there's only so much that they can do. They are constrained by the regular no money syndrome and resource constraint that we all live within. So the MP should be able to do a bit more than just going to parliament to speak and legislate and help keep the executive in check. So you find that that poll that you refer to reflects the sentiments on the ground. There are many places where people look forward to the MP doing what he or she has to do to bring development. So I think that is only a sign of the times. Ordinarily, if things were working properly, the MP will not have that responsibility. But there's a certain reality that you cannot overlook when you go to people to speak to them. So we are all caught up in a certain reality that we cannot escape.
I am forced to ask, for those who don't really know the area too well. What kind of people are they? What do they do? What kind of economic activities are they involved in?
Well, essentially, I'm sure you know the place. Perhaps you have not paid too much attention to it. It shares borders with about 4 constituencies that I've told you about: Cape Coast North, Cape Coast South, Asin South, and then Infantiman. It has perhaps the largest fishing community in Ghana, called Mori. Yes, densely populated. The main preoccupation there is fishing.
Very historical town.
Very historical town. Indeed, if I should use a physical landmark, you know the Agri Memorial Zion School. You know there's a bridge right across the street. So that is the boundary that we share with Cape Coast South. And then on the Infantiman side, when you get to Yamransa, that's where it starts. So Mori is on the left, vastly, densely populated. Now, if you take a turn to the right at Yamransa Junction, you then go through Asebu, you go through Abakrampa, you go to Batenya, right up to Abrodunko. So on the southern part, the economic activity there is basically agrarian farming.
Okay.
So you have 2 major economic activities fused into one constituency: fishing on the one side and agriculture on the other. Now, both economic activities suffer significant shortfalls. When you go to Mori, they will tell you that they consider themselves a major fishing community in Ghana, yet they do not have access to the basic inputs that they need to facilitate their trade. So they will tell you that when they compare their size to other fishing communities in Ghana, they have fewer premix outlets than they think they need. I think at the moment there's a clamor for an additional 3 or so. So it is something that I was confronted with, and I took a position that once they give me the mandate to represent them officially, I'll work hard to ensure that comes to fruition. Of course, the usual problems with outboard motors, fishing nets, and other basic inputs for fishing also came to play. They also expressed disquiet about the recently announced closed fishing season. They thought that the engagements were not sufficient, so they really did not have a handle on exactly what government was doing. They thought that it deprived them of a significant part of their livelihood. Some of them had to go as far as Cote d'Ivoire to make up for the shortfall that existed during the time of the close season. Now, when you go to the agrarian side, you have the regular difficulties, farming inputs. The agriculture there is very basic. Now, that part of the constituency is noted for the production of citrus, oranges, lime, and what have you. So there used to be a citrus factory in Asebu, but over the past 2 years, it has closed down, and it's a major source of concern for those engaged in agriculture. At the very least, they expect that factory will be up and running so that it will become an off-taker of their produce. So I have witnessed instances where people have come from Cote d'Ivoire to buy oranges, lime at ridiculously cheap prices because there was no other use for the produce. I have seen instances where heaps of oranges have gone waste, they've gone rotten, and the farmers have been shorting, they've been left embittered by the lack of a ready market for their produce. And they produce other foodstuffs. There is potential for large-scale commercial farming. There are also a number of mining prospects. I came across a number of quarries. There's even talk of a gold deposit. So the potential exists, but perhaps what has been lacking is a proper framework within which this potential can be tapped and the economic well-being of the people enhanced. So that essentially is a snapshot of what the constituency is about.
Then if these are the difficulties as you have enumerated, the current government seems to have a few policies in there, planting for food and jobs to help you with your agrarian, and then they have the fisheries side as well to help your fisher folk. That should, of course, be certainly something that should interest you.
Well, if these policies were being properly implemented, they would impact on the people. And when you go there, you will see visible signs of the implementation of this program. But everywhere I went, I was confronted with lamentation and criticism of government. They do not appear to have benefited. Indeed, it is interesting that you mentioned these interventions. There's also the one district, one factory. In fact, if you turn left on the Abrodunko Road at a point and you headed for Abakrampa, a few meters in there, you come across a place called Ohiaba, which is supposed to have been identified as one of the sites for the construction of a factory under the one district, one factory initiative. But you go there, meet only a parcel of land that was cleared over a year ago, and periodically it gets eroded whenever it rains. So no activity really is taking place at the moment. So government may be churning out slogans, but its real impact is extremely limited, at least in the Abora Asebu Kwamankese constituency. And there's a place that I have toured over and over and over and over. So I have a feel of what exactly the people are going through. Now, in addition to that, there's also the issue of a lack of infrastructure development. You go to places like Section, and they complain bitterly about lack of potable water, for instance. I saw a number of trenches that had been dug, and I inquired whether this was not a reflection of an attempt by government to resolve the problem. They told me that they've seen this over and over again. Whenever they complain, trenches are dug with a view to laying pipes to bring them water, but it has happened before, and they do not have any confidence at all that the problem will be resolved. You go to other places, the difficulty they have there is a market where they can sell their produce after they've gone to farm. You go to some places, it's the road network, and I must indicate that the road network there is terrible. With the notable exception of the road that goes to Abora and the one that goes to Cape Coast, there's hardly any major road that you can consider decent in the constituency. And it's a major difficulty for the people there. There are issues with healthcare. In fact, some of the chiefs compounds that I told you about, where I distributed the hospital equipment, are operated from rented facilities. And it is not the best. Some of them too are uncompleted and imposes a lot of difficulty on the health professionals who try to assist with the healthcare needs of the people. So there are many problems in all sectors. And what is required now is a representative who will be able to highlight these problems and focus attention so that at the very least some of them are resolved.
The logical question that I can ask you is, these problems are not new. They've been there, and you've held high positions in government before. It's not like you just discovered your lineage.
That is true.
What did you do?
Well, I told you about the Community Information Center, and the history behind it is a bit interesting. I happened to have attended a funeral once, and I was summoned by the chiefs and people of Abakrampa to a meeting one Sunday. So they told me that they know that I'm an indigenous. I hail from there. I've come for a funeral and all that, but they have some challenges with education. They told me about the difficulty they have with ICT education because they perceive that as one of the enablers of development these days. And if children are going to school and they are deprived of such a basic accoutrement like computers, it becomes a difficult. So they asked what I could do about it. So I told them that, well, there is a program by government at the time, or there was a program by government at the time to construct what we call the Enhanced Community Information Centers, which fell under the Ministry of Communication. So I ensured that I made a case for them that that constituency also is in urgent need of one. Indeed, there are about 4 secondary schools in that constituency. Some of them had computer laboratories, but they were not stocked with computers. There's an agency called GIFEC under the Ministry of Communications, Ghana Investment Fund for Electronic Communication. They were into the business of distributing computers to schools, and they had done that across the country. So I also made a case there that, look, I may hail from there, but the reality is that they are also Ghanaians, and they deserve a fair share of the national cake. So if you could pay attention to this particular need and see what can be done. So the computers were distributed to those 4 schools. So that is how I leveraged whatever influence I had in government.
A little bit.
Yes, but you see, there's only so much that one individual can do. At the time, there was a member of parliament who had a specific mandate, to champion this cause. I'm sure he did his bit, but his best perhaps may not have been sufficient to address the problem. Now I'm seeking their mandate as a direct representative. Mind you, in my previous guise as a deputy minister, I had jurisdiction over the entire country. So whatever I do must reflect that national character. So I cannot simply drive development on a daily basis to my place simply because I hail from there. That would be unfair to other parts of this country. But once I become a legislator representing the people of Abora Asebu Kwamankese, I have a very specific focus on that constituency. So whatever needs to be done, whatever liaison needs to be struck with appropriate authorities to ensure that our fair share of development is accessed, I will do. So we need to delineate the positions carefully so that it does not appear as if we come into power only to serve the interests of our people. I don't think that is a way to go. Yes.
Yeah. You are watching Face to Face. My guest is NDC parliamentary candidate for Abora Asebu Kwamankese, Felix Ofosu. Face to Face will be right back.
The biggest corporate sports competition, the City Business Olympics, returns for another grand event. Does your team have what it takes to win on the field of play? Does your team have the grit to dethrone the current overall champions GCB Bank? Then bring it on and show us what you got on the City Business Olympics 2019. Participate in games like 7-a-side football, swimming, volleyball, basketball, tug of war, tennis, and new challenges like plank walk, tag team sack race, the CEO's challenge, and many more. It's a day of teamwork, skill, strength, endurance, with all the fun and networking as corporate Ghana gathers to show us what they're made of outside the boardrooms and meetings. The City Business Olympics happening on Saturday, 21st September 2019 at the Birmingham Sports Complex. Time 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Call 0205-973-973 for more details and registration. The City Business Olympics is powered by 97.3 City FM with support from City TV and citybusinessnews.com and sponsored by NND Digital Press Limited. City Business Olympics, bridging the gap in our corporate world through sports.
For the highlights of the top stories from the newspapers and the in-depth discussions of the news, What the Papers Are Saying, your weekly newsstand show, which sums up the big stories from reliable newspapers and news websites.
I think what should happen in all this is that they need to sit down and reconcile the systems they use. If they agree to use one system, let's ensure that that same system is used. Because if you are using another system and I'm using another one, the conclusions may not be the same because each system has assumptions it makes, each system has conditions and things they must meet, etc.
Join Vivian Kailoko and her panel to review the headlines, break down the stories, and analyze the issues. What the Papers Are Saying is this and every Thursday at 9 p.m. on City TV.
Welcome back to Face to Face. Now, Felix, let's expand the conversation a bit. You've been on the campaign grounds with former President Mahama.
Well, unfortunately, because of the, I won't call it a distraction, but because of the primaries, there was a need for me to go around the constituency. But I have followed keenly, and of course, I do know what strategies are at play for the campaign. So I'm quite familiar with what is happening here.
At this point, how well do you think the campaign is going?
I think it's going very well. There's an issue of peaking at the right time. And mind you, we are going on a long-haul journey. So there's a need to evolve a strategy that allows you to stay relevant across the entire period. You need to know when to intervene in the national discourse, when to stay out, and when to do what. So on the whole, and on the balance, I think that the former president, or our flag bearer, President Mahama, is doing a fantastic job. At the very least, he has been able to highlight some of the major difficulties that we have as a people. A couple of weeks ago, he intervened in a financial sector crisis and questioned the approach used by this government. It elicited some response from the vice president, which clearly was unsatisfactory. I mean, I don't think that was a sort of response that you require to a question raised by President Mahama.
Only today, it was fair for him to ask, well, your people didn't do their job well?
Well, again, that is a very poor excuse. The asset quality review, which led to the whole banking sector bailout was prepared under the NDC government. It was an indication that we had identified the problem and were taking steps to address it. We would have addressed it differently to what this government is doing. It appears that this government has used the opportunity to go out at some indigenous businesses that ordinarily should receive support from government so they can compete favorably in the financial sector.
Indigenous businesses who were wasting the money
Well,
you gave them?
you see, why? I've made the example, for instance, of some of these large technology companies elsewhere, Google, Facebook, Tesla. Recently, Elon Musk was embroiled in some controversy. You saw what the regulators did. They asked him to step aside or limit his role in the firm. But they ensured that the firm survived. How many times has Google not been fined by either the European Union or the US government for one violation or the other? How many billions has Facebook not paid in fines for violations on data protection issues and other unethical practices that the regulator deemed inappropriate? But the central point has been that these firms have been saved. They have not been asked to go down. In the early 2000s, I'm sure you recall the issue with Google in the EU, where they thought that Google was too big. No, Microsoft, I beg your pardon. They thought it was too big and that it should be split. You remember that conversation? But at the end of the day, the company kept its integrity because the regulators and the governments there find that they are useful in terms of their contributions to the economy. So difficulties may have arisen. Managerial oversight may have been poor. The practices within the establishments may not have been sound. But there's a larger national interest in having strong indigenous financial players who can compete within the financial sector. So that ought to have been considered and a way found to address the difficulty without having these businesses collapse with the attendant job losses that we are all lamenting. And as I speak to you, there is a claim that the deposits of depositors or customers of these banks are secured. But we do not seem to see our way clear. There are complaints that they are not receiving all that is due them and what have you. And it has led to very difficult challenges for those who are involved in this thing. So the former president raised the issue about, for instance, what role government's own indebtedness, some of these banks who have financed projects undertaken by contractors for government, played in this whole melee. And the answers were not forthcoming. What the vice president did was to launch attacks. And it appears that now the vice president's role has been limited to launching attacks on the former president. You would think that his office requires a bit more sobriety and reflection so that you carry yourself in a manner that is dignified. But it appears that his role now is simply to launch pot shots at the former president.
They could say the same at you. You are launching pot shots, so they also should feel free
of course,
to launch some at you.
Politics is a contact sport. The expectations of a vice president are not the same as mine. He is supposed to be the head of the economic management. So he must be measured in what he says. But the point I'm making is that rather than being, and we've seen former vice presidents, we've seen Mr. Aka, we've seen President Mahama himself, we've seen President Mills. Recently, we lost Mr. Misata, God bless his soul. All of them carry themselves in a manner that reflected the office. But this one appears a wee bit too interested in launching attacks. It is as if he's become government's bulwark against Mr. Mahama. Not that is the difficulty. Again, all the talk that he engaged in opposition have proven completely shallow. Oh, absolutely. I mean, he has been exposed as being flat-footed, even in the management of the economy. All the noises he made about the exchange rates have boomeranged in his face. He claimed they won't borrow. Borrowing has gone through the roof. So in terms of his own standing in the eyes of the Ghanaian people, he does not command the same level of trust and confidence he did in opposition.
But all the data also shows that the economy at least
I will challenge
is a
that
bit
data.
more stable.
Well, I will challenge that data. The fact of the matter is that all the indices you see are a reflection of the work put in by the previous administration before we left power. If you want to have a feel of exactly what I'm talking about, check non-oil growth. You find that it is just at the same level as 2016. It is the additional oil find that we had that has ramped up the economy a bit. It has not been due to any significant work that they have done. Inflation has been a single digit before. Under the NDC administration, when President Mahama was head of the economic management team, we held inflation at single digit for 33 continuous months. This government has been unable to do so, and I dare say will be unable to do so. The highest economic growth we've had has been under an NDC government, 14.4%. The highest this government has achieved was 8.1%. Even that was because of an 80.6% in oil production, which they knew absolutely nothing about. In fact, if you doubt me, check the projections of the World Bank, the IMF, the Economic Intelligence Unit, Moody's, and all the other rating agencies. They said that because of the additional oil find that we had made in 2016 and the work that had gone into production, our economy was going to get a boost because of the additional oil inflows. Oil revenue alone that this government has had, by the end of this year, will run to almost 13 billion Ghana cedis. So really, their work was really done for them. But the point that I seek to make is that if you compare them now to the claims they made in opposition, they have been so badly exposed. So rather than see the former president as an object of attack, I think the vice president should focus more on doing what has to be done. For instance, look at that linguistic acrobatics he engaged in. In opposition, he told us, for instance, that if the fundamentals of your economy are weak, the exchange rate would expose you. He actually went ahead to say, in that infamous speech at the Central University, that the exchange rate is the most important indicator of economic performance. Then, when he came into power, and the Ghana cedi took a catastrophic tumble in the early part of this year, he changed and told us that it is possible for the exchange rate to be weak and still have strong economic fundamentals. That is linguistic acrobatics stemming from being caught out as completely flat-footed in the management of the economy. He could not even show candor and honesty and admit that the claims he made in the past perhaps were erroneous. Look at his treatment of our public debt. The noise, the song and dance that he made out of our public debt, claiming that we had reduced governance to borrowing and that they will borrow less and do more. In the whole of the 8 years of the NDC, we borrowed up to 90 billion Ghana cedis. At the same time, we carried out perhaps the biggest capital investment in the history of the Fourth Republic. One of Dr. Bamiya's criticisms was that we were borrowing to finance consumption. The reality and the facts on the ground show that that is not true. Because at that time, our capex to GDP, that is our capital expenditure to GDP, was hovering between 5 to 6%. In the last 3 years, they have added 84 billion Ghana cedis to the national debt. That is an addition. But in terms of borrowing, they borrowed over 140 billion Ghana cedis. And yet, what is there to show? Their own capex to GDP, if you check the mid-year review budget presented by the finance minister, it is under 1%. So that is the clearest indication that the very things that they said in opposition, they have trampled upon in government. Look at the level of corruption that we are witnessing. I mean, I have had cause to say, for instance, that it appears that this government, what we call a government now, is in fact a special purpose vehicle for corruption. And that it is open season on the national purse. So every Tom, Dick and Harry is helping himself to
and what are the specific cases they are looking at?
Why? Look at this NYA case, for instance. Look at the
What has happened there?
Well, I'm surprised that you've not heard.
Well, because so far as I'm concerned,
I'm surprised
the
that you
NYA boss, there were rumors he had been fired, sacked. Yesterday we checked, he's still at post.
Well, but I'm sure you've heard that he has awarded a sole source contract to the tune of 4.5 million Ghana cedis to an entity that was supposed to train 500, youth in street light repairs. I mean, how much do medical students pay to warrant the payment of at least 9,000 Ghana cedis per head for 500 youth who are supposed to learn how to fix street lights? We all saw the PPA scandal. We've seen the PDS scandal. I mean, a government...
All being dealt with.
Dealt with in what manner? How long has it been since the PDS scandal broke out? Indeed, we were told by the energy minister of all people that PDA procured that concession agreement. Sorry, PDS, I beg your pardon. Procured that concession agreement through fraud. These are the words of the energy minister. So we were told that the whole concession agreement had been suspended. Indeed, I would argue that if fraud is ever found to have taken place in any transaction, what ought to have been done is a total cancellation of that concession, because fraud vitiates everything, as you would be well aware. Then, in other words, we were told that the same PDS which secured that concession on the basis of fraud has been recycled to handle the distribution of power, at least in a certain sector, on behalf of the ECG. We were told that a delegation had been dispatched to Qatar to find out about what happened. You see, the admission itself that government handed over a 22 billion Ghana cedi valued asset like ECG to an entity with dubious credentials like PDS.
Allegedly.
Well, Well, the energy minister did not allege. He stated categorically that they procured it through fraud. So I'm only quoting him. I'm not saying anything that he has not said. Now, the admission that it was possible for an entity like that to secure such an asset through fraud should have been enough to get heads to roll, even before any other investigation is launched. What it means is that they simply slept on the job. They allowed the ball to pass, or they allowed the ball to drop. They did not do a thorough job. In addition to this, we have heard virtually nothing about the outcome of the investigation.
Well, they have told you that the teams are back. The president is in Japan. We will hear from them this week. They have said so.
I can assure you, Godfred, that the gravity of the claims made by the energy minister should have warranted much swifter action than we are seeing. But look at the Australia scandal. You dabble in sports also. You tell me, was it not an established fact that scores of people parading as journalists were sent to Gold Coast, Australia? And it came out that they indeed were not journalists. So what it means is that officials colluded to send people who were not journalists to Australia. This created huge embarrassment. We were told that an inquiry had been set up into the matter. You dabble in sports also. So you tell me if you cited a report of that investigation. And yet, what sanctions have been meted out to those who would have been caught? In other words, we are told that it was ghosts who ferried all those reporters or supposed journalists to Australia. Look at the Muvimpina scandal, for instance, Godfred. The NPA itself came out and said that their regulations have been violated because Muvimpina was not licensed to trade in the downstream sector. The PPA indicated, in fact, the managing director of BOST at the time is on record to have admitted to vandalizing the procurement process. As I speak to you, there are people in court on the basis of procurement breaches. What step did the president take? You recall that the energy minister set up an inquiry. Within the twinkling of an eye, they were broadsided by the BNI, who basically cleared anybody involved in a matter of wrongdoing. Look at the Mytilinos scandal. Mytilinos, the president himself gave executive approval for a $1 billion deal, which, but for the vigilance of the minority and other civil society activists, would have cost us an extra $800 million. And I could go on and on and on. Look at the Oslo scandal.
Fine. You make this list. You are trying to make a case. But yes. For me, what I see out of what you're saying is the government that you were a part of was beaten out of office on the basis of corruption. These are the same claims that are being made against this. The casual voter sitting back says, well, these two sets of people are just corrupt. Why should we trust you? You allow people to have a cynical feeling of politicians.
I have a major difficulty with that analysis. Look, I agree that the voter reserves the right to scrutinize the options available. But you see, no excuse must be made for a government that does not perform, like the MPP is doing. We were empowered when they came to level all manner of allegations of corruption against us. At the time, the former president had taken concrete action. Indeed, in the case of Victoria Hammer, I have argued, for instance, that up to now, I'm unable to determine the exact wrongdoing that lady made. She was only heard on tape engaging in what we will call salacious gossip, if you like, and then saying that if she had not made $1 million, she was not going to speak ill about her colleague minister.
You didn't find anything wrong with that?
In what
Felix?
Way? No, Godfrey, if I say that I have an aspiration to make $1 million, it's not the same as saying I'm going to steal $1 million. But
depends on where you sit.
Fine, but assuming that there was something wrong with what he said, with what she said, the former president fired him within 24 hours of the airing of that recording. Within 24 hours of the airing of that recording. In the case of Jida, Mr. Abugapele is very well known to President Mahama. He is a leading light in the National Democratic Congress. But the president did not hesitate to arraign him before court, which ultimately resulted in his imprisonment. As I speak to you, he is in jail. The entities involved in the Jida scandal were made to refund monies. In the Bass Branding scandal, not only did the minister resign within hours of the breaking of that story, a refund was insisted upon and it was paid. In the national service case, it was the president himself who commissioned an investigation. And dozens of people were put before court in that matter. I'm unable to tell where things are at the moment, but it's something that you can find out. It's public knowledge. So the former president took concrete steps, despite all the allegations made.
So have they? They will tell you they have taken concrete steps. PDS is suspended.
No. The president,
PPA is suspended.
The president publicly defended the Muvimpina scandal in his press interaction with the media in August of 2018. He said that it was because of a lack of sufficient regulation, when there is no lack of any regulation in that sector. The president publicly defended him. What happened in the Oslo scandal? The president defended the minister. But for the vigilance of Honorable Ablakwa, we were going to pay an extra $8 million for a facility valued at around $4 million. Within 2 weeks, indeed, government's own documents showed that in a matter of 2 weeks, they were going to effect payment. Yet the president publicly backed the minister in this matter, in spite of all the evidence available. In the cash proceeds scandal, even before Parliament had opportunity to scrutinize the deal and come out with the verdict, the president dismissed it as going nowhere.
But it was investigated.
What has happened? No. Well, we all saw the investigation. How it was possible for entities operating in the private sector to get the backing of a major government agency like the Ministry of Trade, to get them to charge people for sitting close to the president at a function. We were told that the president in question was Mr. Ashim Morton and not President Akufo-Addo. I mean, would you pay $1,000 to sit with Mr. Ashim Morton? With the greatest respect to him. But all these matters have been swept under the carpet. What other one can I refer to? In the list,
you can do that.
The list is so long.
But your list is also very long.
No. I've told you specific action that we took. Indeed, the onus has always been on this government to prove that the claims they made in opposition were true. If people were involved in JIDA in ways that were corrupt, what else has been done apart from what President Mahama initiated? You tell me. Who else has been prosecuted apart from the very people that President Mahama put before them? They are married you, that they made so much noise about. Was it not their own Attorney General who wrote in a letter to the Minister of Energy and said that there is a want of evidence of corruption in that deal, and that if indeed they need to cancel that deal, they are going to have to show that there was corruption? Was it not the same Ameri deal that transmogrified into the Mytilineous deal that almost cost us $800 million? So really, in terms of doing something about corruption, they have not. Every week, there is an outbreak of corruption. So at the moment, like our communication officer rightly said, there's a traffic jam of corruption cases. Hardly.
Okay, my red light is on. Felix, my traffic light is on. You're watching Face to Face with Felix Ofosu. We'll take a quick break and be right back.
Ghana Rising 2019, a conference to optimize opportunities for indigenous local businesses to rise up and take their place in Ghana's economy. How can you take advantage of the local content laws in the oil and gas sector? How can you benefit from the new initiatives in the agriculture sector? How can your business penetrate the sanitation and environment industry in Ghana? Ghana Rising 2019. It's time to energize indigenous participation in the agriculture, oil and gas, sanitation, and environmental sectors in Ghana. Ghana Rising 2019. Theme: taking commanding heights of the Ghanaian economy. Opportunities for indigenous businesses. Date: the 19th of September 2019. Venue: Kempinski Gold Coast Hotel. To register, call 0205-973-973 or 0550-900-006. Register today at the front desk of City FM and City TV, behind the Adabraka Police Station. Ghana Rising is sponsored by SunPower Innovations, Ghana Chamber of Bulk Oil Distributors, Rigworld Solutions, Ghana Exim Bank, and Climate Innovation Center, Ghana. Ghana Rising 2019 is supported by 97.3 City FM and City TV.
Tune in to The Point of View, Mondays and Wednesdays at 9 p.m. as Bernard Avlet takes the news further. He will bring the right guests, ask them the relevant questions, and get you the real insights you need on the big stories for the day.
But they love me. You know, they love me to bits on the campaign trail. They love me to bits. Because, you see, we are of the view that people want to hear lies. It's not true. Okay. People can decipher lies and truthfulness. And behind it all, they know who is speaking the truth. And even though they may shout or not shout or everything, at the end of the day, they respect you for being who you are.
The Point of View with Bernard Avle, Monday and Wednesday nights, only on City TV. Point of View is brought to you in association with Stanbic Bank. Moving forward.
Welcome back to Face to Face. A very interesting conversation with Felix Kwakye. So Felix, we're in the final phase of the conversation, and we'll talk a bit about the campaign as well. But I also realized that a lot of those that have been considered young persons, so to speak, you're not really young, but
well, we need a earlier context at least.
Yes, have decided to put on the NDC side, at least for now, have decided to put their hats in the hat to contest for a lot of seats. Was there a conversation around this? Like, did you speak to each other, or it just was coincidental?
Well, I don't think that there was a conscious conversation. But one of the things that is considered in these matters is the ability of the individual to win a seat, especially when you are in opposition. No, there's something to be said for name and face recognition in an election. So you hail from a constituency. You have had opportunity to serve in government before. You've been involved in our politics for some time. So people readily identify with you. They know what stuff you are made of. Because you have that experience in politics and governance, you are also able to leverage resources from various quarters to assist with the campaign and couch a message that resonates with the people and assist the party's overall effort towards annexing power. So some of that consideration may have gone into the decision by some people to contest. But I guess also that at an individual level, people thought that they had something to offer and that they could help transform the fortunes of their respective constituencies. That perhaps is why you are seeing many people going into. But it can be only well and good for the NDC, because if we have high caliber people putting themselves up, it helps to improve the quality that we are going to have in Parliament. Mind you, we are also losing quite some experienced hands. The Honorable Bagwin, Honorable Electre, Honorable Nisafuseni have all paid their dues over the years and made a significant contribution to legislation and the fortunes of the NDC in particular. So there's also the need to replace them with relatively younger but equally competent people in Parliament, so that we do not suffer a precipitous decline in the quality of representation that we have.
When you entered politics, you were considered very brazen, abrasive young man. You stepped on a lot of toes. Have you changed?
Well, you see, again, I think that many people come to that debate with a lot of prejudice. The reality, you and I are relatively young people, is that our society was traditionally not used to young people questioning the status quo. We also happen to have a certain mindset. You know, we create sacred cows. We think that there are people who, by virtue of their accomplishments in life and what they have done and their track record, cannot be scrutinized. So if a young man dares scrutinize such people,
it's not how you do the.
It's not really about how. It's not really about how. Look, I have endeavored to be blunt and candid in the way that I do my politics.
It's a thin line. Huh?
Well, the point is that I have endeavored to be blunt. If it is black, you call it black. If it is white, it is white. I expect, of course, that those who disagree with me, who happen to be on the other side of our politics, will push back.
And even some in your party don't like your stuff.
Well, I'm not sure of many people in my party. But it is not unusual. Is that what?
Chairman Rawlings?
Well, again, that must be put in proper context. I do not know of any, if you like, out-and-out disagreement between me and the former president. You do know of the Fonka games, where there was a sitting president, but he was being contested by the wife of the former president. Eventually, people within the party had to take sides. We happen to believe that once President Mills had emerged, he deserved our unalloyed support. At the same time, he came under what we consider to be unfair attacks from people who were seeking to challenge him. It was our duty to fend off those attacks and correct the record and straighten it. In doing so, the other side will not be happy. They will push back.
But this seems to have carried off. Just recently, the two of you were engaged in a war of words again.
Well, I'm not aware of any war of words. The former president said something which was factually inaccurate, which bordered on my integrity. I reserved the right. I owed it to myself, my family, my friends, the party I belong to, and the government I worked in to correct the record. That is precisely what I did. I only said that the claims cannot be true on the basis of the facts. So I don't see how that can be deemed a war of words. I don't think that if you are accused falsely, you should let it slide only because of who has made the allegation. I don't think that it is fair at all.
Recently as well, your primaries have opened the path for people to talk about money and politics, funding in our democracy. What are your thoughts on those? Are these things that you think about?
Absolutely.
You should have spent quite a bit of money.
I've engaged leaders at various levels in our party on what I think is becoming an unsustainable path to politics in our country. And it's a problem that cuts across both parties. The reality is that it has become quite expensive to run for public office. It is also true that it is not a phenomenon limited to Ghana. Indeed, in the US, billions are spent on a campaign annually. I mean, the media budget for most of the campaigns are mind-blowing. Perhaps ours is peanuts if you compare it. But it is becoming quite expensive. Now, there are many sides to that. In my interactions with the grassroots of our party and our delegates, I have come to the conclusion that there's a certain mistrust of the political elite at the moment. The notion is that once they elect an individual to represent them or play any role at all in the governance of the country, that individual derives direct benefits. And more often than not, the individuals are unable to do what they promised them. So perhaps when it comes, or the time comes for primaries, for endorsement and what have you, they want to take whatever benefit they perceive they would get upfront. So that if they don't see you again, then they would have been dealt with fairly. So you cannot blame them for having that mindset. Perhaps what it means that we need to do more to earn their trust so that the element of money is removed. Also, once you enter a campaign, you need to finance it. For instance, transport, logistics, you have a campaign team who's feeding, accommodation, transportation, you need to take care of. For instance, on the day of primaries, if you come to Abora Asebu Kwamankese, there are places like Srodorf Abasa, there are places where you need to go through the Cape Coast North Constituency to get into. It's quite some distance from the polling center. So people from there have to be transported. Now they are going to leave whatever it is that they are doing and come there because of you. So you have a duty also to feed them for the several hours that they will spend there. And because of the numbers, it tends to escalate the cost. So the problem is not a simplistic one of inducement per se, but it's a way that we organize our political environment, which is escalating the cost. I think that we need to have a frank national conversation rather than darken the problem. Have a frank national conversation on how we can beat down the cost so that only the best emerge on the basis of merits, on the basis of what the delegates perceive to be the person's proven ability and track record. So I'm not going to run away from the fact that it has become expensive, but I think that it is a function of the way we have operated over the years. It did not used to be the case in the past. It has gotten there. What can we do to stem it before it gets to a point that becomes unsustainable?
And you're in a good place to answer this question for me. Are we attracting the right kind of people into our politics, considering that the perception is young people now enter politics just because they can get wealthy?
No, I think
people sit back and look and say, oh, this is my classmate. A year after entering politics, he's bought a V8, he owns a house in Transaco Valley. Well, so that is the only motivation.
That's also an unfair accusation.
But it is
the reality is that those we sit in classrooms with, it is not that, with the greatest respect to everybody, they were better than us in terms of academics or prospects. You make a decision to enter politics. The thing is that, for instance, when I became a minister, before I became a minister, I lived somewhere. I had a vehicle. Okay? I go into public office. I'm given a duty post vehicle, not mine. I didn't have the benefit of a bungalow, so I lived in my own residence. But others had bungalows. When you leave office, you leave those things behind. You are paid a salary, which is deemed to be commensurate with the work that you do. And that is about it. Perhaps some have not been able to carry themselves well, so they project wealth in a manner that is offensive and rubs off wrongly on the citizenry. But I don't think that the perception that politics is an avenue for wealth making is correct. Maybe the outbreak of scandals, as we are witnessing now, may reinforce that perception. But I think some of the brightest and best we have in this country are involved in politics. Look, when you come to Abora Asebu Kwamankese, for instance, I'm sure you know that we had perhaps the highest number of aspirants. That was myself. Yeah. I've served in government for quite some time. I've been involved in politics for 15 years. There's Dr. Nama Brown-Kluchi, a young lecturer at the University of Ghana, brilliant climate scientist. There was Dr. Pius Isando, who is a medical doctor, doing well in his practice. There was K.K. Agui, who happened to be my junior in school, who is into business and is doing quite well. Anyway, a number of other people who came to the contest with some substance. At least on the NDC side in that constituency, we offered quality. You go to Adenta, there was Nano Yeleta, whose track record everybody knows. There's Mohamed Ramadan, who is a young man doing quite well in his profession. And it was widespread. There was the executive assistant to the former IGP, who beat an experienced legislator in the shape of Honorable Yelechwe. He has come with enormous quality, enormous experience in security and policing. So you cannot take away the quality of people who put themselves up this time. And it can only inure to the benefit of the party in particular, I mean the NDC, and the nation as a whole. So I think that that conversation needs to be straightened. It is not correct that politics is an avenue for wealth making, and that people who get in there are not necessarily the best we have. I don't think that it's a correct perception at all. Okay, but of course, we are public officials, or when we get into politics, we come into the public limelight. Criticism is allowed, so sometimes people take pot shots at you. That we can live with. But I think that we need to straighten the record and not create the impression that people go into politics because they have nothing else doing. I mean, if you come into the NDC, I can give you a tall list of high caliber people who got into politics very early. Mr. Ato Ahoy is a Harvard graduate. His brother, Professor Ahoy, is a graduate from the University of Cambridge. Mr. Chajuji Kata is an alumnus of Oxford. Mr. Kwam Pepra went to Columbia University. He's an electrical engineer by training. Honorable Mama Yariga is a Harvard graduate. And I could go on and on and on and on. Look at Honorable Samuel Kudeto Ablakwa, one of the most brilliant people you have. Indeed, creme de la creme in terms of legislation in this country. How can anybody question his competence or his caliber? Only because he got into politics young. So I think that we need to be, even on the MPP side, they are very brilliant young people putting in their best. Even if their best is not enough, it cannot be for want. It cannot be for want of effort or credentials. So that conversation has to be put in proper context. It is something that we suffer a lot. Indeed, I have had occasion to meet some people who have attested and confessed that before they got into contact with me, the perception was that I perhaps didn't even have any credential before coming into politics, which is not correct. So when I explained this, so that, then it is such an unfair. They see that when you put us on any platform, we will hold our own against anybody from any sector that you bring in this country. So yes, we concede that we, those in the public light, must be subject to scrutiny and criticism. The criticism is welcome, but it must also be fair and must speak to the facts as they exist.
All right. Thank you very much, Felix Ofosu, and all the best.
All right. Thank you very much.
Abora Asebu Kwamankese. We will bring you back.
Absolutely. I hope that the next time I come here, I would have emerged as the member of parliament. And I pledge wholeheartedly to work to enhance the fortunes of the people in that constituency. It is my one abiding passion at the moment.
Thank you very much, Felix. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Face to Face. My name is Godfred Akoto Boafo. Have a good day.